Welcome everybody to the African Doctoral Academy Masterclass. My name is Natalie Kavalik and I'm the Program Manager at the African Doctoral Academy, and I'm joined by our guest speaker, Selene Delport, as well as my colleagues Luther and Francois. Selena is the Postgraduate Workshop Coordinator at Stellenbosch University's Writing Lab. She has tutored at various Stellenbosch University departments, including the English Literature Department and the Unit for Document Design. She's joined the Writing Lab team as a consultant in 2006, and since 2009, Selena has been presenting writing workshops for postgraduate students writing their theses and dissertations. She has also developed several other workshops for postgraduate students, including courses on research proposals, academic articles, and argumentation. Selene Delport will be speaking on the topic of talk shows and dinner parties, writing a literature review today. We will be opening the floor to questions during the presentation via a poll and a Q&A section. So please feel free to ask your questions. Please put up your hand, raise it during the session when questions are being asked. And you are also allowed to pose any questions in the chat or Q&A section. My colleagues Luther as well as Francois will be assisting with the questions and the poll. Just also a reminder to everybody joining today that the session is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. The links also can be found on the African Doctoral Academy website. So welcome, and I'm very excited to hand over the platform now to our presenter, Selena. So thanks, Selena.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for the lovely warm welcome. And thank you to colleagues Luther and Francois as well for all the support and assistance. Just quickly, before I share anything, I think I should probably explain where the title comes from. I really like analogies, and analogies specifically to help us with our writing. And a few years ago, I attended a workshop by Dr. Arnold Wenzel, and he described writing your literature review as if you're the host of a talk show. So you have the guests, you have the talking points, you get them to talk to each other, you give your input. Another analogy that I came across that I found very useful is from Pat Thompson and Barbara Kamler. They said that they didn't come up with the analogy, but they can't remember where they heard it. But they likened writing a literature review is like hosting a dinner party.
Writing a literature review is a lot like hosting a dinner party. As host of the dinner party, you decide who to invite and who not to invite. You can't invite every person you know because there simply isn't enough space in your house. Similarly, you can't invite every text you've read because there simply isn't enough space in your literature review. Now, since this is a formal dinner party, you're allowed to be friends with Wikipedia, but you will never admit to knowing Wikipedia. Only invite your formal friends. At the dinner party, you want to be a good host. That means that you won't dominate the conversation, but neither will you stand in the corner and simply watch your guests mingle. That would be awkward. As host, you're expected to take part in the conversation. The same goes for the literature review. Your voice shouldn't dominate, but it should be there throughout the entire literature review, not just in the conclusion. Sometimes writers feel that they first want to explain what everyone else has said, and then they'll say something at the very end. However, at a dinner party, you won't quietly sit at the dinner table and then when everybody is ready to go home, suddenly start responding to what your guest said a couple of hours ago. In a literature review, it's confusing to your reader if you only respond to what other writers have said several pages after you've told the reader what they've said. Just like at a dinner party, the literature review consists of conversations. Say for argument's sake that you invited 5 friends: Abongile Sibula, Jason Watts, Lerato Modise, Farirat Chiweshe, and Amina Farouk. It won't be that Abongile says something, Jason says something, Lerato says something, and then everyone goes home. A conversation means that there will be a back and forth between all of you. For example, you might ask your guests what they think causes writer's block, and the following conversation might happen. I wonder what causes writer's block.
I've heard some people say that it's just a lack of skills, but I think it's more a case of rules being too rigid.
Actually, Writer's block is caused by neurosis.
You know what, Jason? I agree with you. For me, writing blocks are a form of anxiety. I just call them writing apprehensions.
No, Lerato. You seem to equate writer's block to writing anxiety. Writer's block is actually distinct from writing anxiety. Writer's block is a lot bigger than that and includes writing anxiety as only one of the causes of writer's block.
That actually makes a lot of sense, Abongile. But that means there's also more to writer's block than just the rules being too rigid.
You make an excellent point. I've actually come up with 6 causes of a writer's block. These are censors, fear of failure, perfectionism, early experiences, procrastination, and mental health issues.
To me, it sounds like there are 2 broad categories those causes can fit into: inherent writing blocks and situational writing blocks.
I agree, but neither of those categories actually consider the writer's social position.
Here is an example of what this conversation might look like in your literature review. Just remember to use your guests' surnames. And so the conversation continues until you, as host, close off the dinner party and bid your guests goodbye.
So I'm hoping that the little video or the little animation sets the tone for our webinar today, because I'm going to refer back to it quite a few times. No analogy is perfect and would perfectly fit whatever it's being compared to, but hopefully it does highlight some important points that we're going to talk about in writing a literature review. And one important thing is that your voice is very important. In a dinner party, like in the animation, you're not going to be silent. And I think that's what I often find with a lot of literature reviews, are that the writer's own voice is missing, or it's being dominated by the other voices. Because in the end, even if you're writing just a literature review, it's still about your research story, your argument, the points that you're trying to make. And a critical, and to show that critical voice, to show your voice, it starts with critical reading, and we'll touch on that very briefly because I'm going to focus more on the writing part. But to keep in mind, your readers are interested in your views. They are interested in your interpretations. They want to see what is your argument. They want to see what position you take. If they weren't, they could have just as well don't look at your reference list, read the same articles you did, and that's it. They are reading your review to get an idea of what is your stance. How do you connect things together? What are the gaps that you identify? So you're constantly sharing your research story and your ideas and positions with your reader. So when we read, we want to read generously. In other words, you want to read open to the ideas of the author that you're reading, but you also want to read critically and evaluate if what you're reading is valuable. So you always start first by looking at, is the source going to be useful to you? Is it going to be relevant to your own research? Because sometimes you find a bunch of sources, but you're not going to read all of them critically. You first want to determine, is this important? And then you look for the validity of their argument. Is the internal consistency, presuppositions that's maybe explicitly stated or not, and what are the implications? And you can ask specific questions of the argument that the writers make in their literature review. So you can ask, are the arguments logical? How valid are the definitions of the concepts that they provide? Are they using credible sources? Does it make sense? And then also internally, you want to evaluate, does their argument or the different parts of their argument, do those parts correspond with each other? Or are they maybe things that seem like a contradiction? Do they conform to the author's main point of view? And you also want to look at what the presuppositions are. What are they basing their arguments on? Do they explicitly state what those presuppositions are? Do you have to guess at them? Because we don't always have to state our presuppositions. So if you're in engineering, you're not going to have to prove that E equals mc squared, for argument's sake. It's an acceptable law within your field. But then sometimes you still, with other newer type of research, or you're building on something, you might want, or you're reading or understanding of something might be affected by presuppositions that you have. You want to then maybe explicitly state what those are and make sure they're well founded, and obviously do the same when you read an article. And then also, when reading the article, you think about what are the implications of what they're saying. If the argument is taken to its fullest extent, what would that mean maybe for the reader? What would it mean for maybe participants in studies like that? And are these implications of what their argument, what is going to happen, are they consistent with the intention of the authors? Now, that's just very, very briefly about the reading part. For the rest of this webinar, we're going to look at just the writing. And you want to think the whole time focus and information management. So how do you write in such a way that you keep your reader's attention on the content? And also, how do you manage the information? What do you put first? What do you put second? What do you put in? What do you leave out? And that starts obviously with a critical reading and deciding which sources are important and not. So you very carefully want to choose what you include, because even if you leave out something, that tells your reader about your stance, where you position yourself. So if there are multiple, for argument's sake, theorists in your field, your choice of who you're leaving out also shows your reader where do you align yourself. And the whole time, think coherence, so creating flow, linking ideas. I'll give you some practical tips for that. But also think argumentation. A literature review isn't just regurgitating something that you've read. It's basically all or most types of academic writing has some element of argument in it, where you're taking a stance and you are arguing for the stance. And in academic arguments, it doesn't have to be that it's two diametrically opposed viewpoints, or that there's only one winner. It can simply be that there's multiple different possibilities of how something can be interpreted. And with the literature review, you show this is my interpretation. Or you show with your literature review that there's a gap in the literature, and your argument comes in that you have to prove that there's a gap and that this gap has to be addressed. And then keep track of every single thing you read, not just of what you decide to use, because as your ideas about your topic develops, you're also thinking of the way that you read will also change and will also develop. And an article that you found in April and you thought this is not that important, suddenly now in September you realize this is a key article, and then you don't want to spend ages looking for that article. You want to immediately place your hand on it and read it again. So I'd like to ask a question, and I'd love responses. How do you keep track of your own writing? And no shame or judgment if the way that you do it is in the picture. This is often what my office looks like, hence a formal background. But you can share in the chat, or you can share, or you can raise your hand. There's a raise hand function at the top. And then, yeah, please share with me. Lisa Harris says she uses G Drive. Yes, that's a good good strategy, so that you can access it anywhere. Ah, very nice. Charmaine says trying to keep a reading journal. I like the trying to. Yes, I like that. Ah, I see that Christopher Morris. No. Ah, Devasham. Hi, Devasham. I see some names I recognize. Devasham says she keeps a diary and a database matrix. Oh, I love that. Christopher says an Excel spreadsheet is becoming slightly like this. Yes, like this picture. Jody says she keeps many electronic and hard copy drafts, and her office looks like the picture. Yes. And then Dr. Mandla says Word document. I haven't heard of this one yet. Miss Gajar, please. I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's names. Ms. Gajar says she uses Notion for keeping track of reading. Oh, I like that. I'm going to look that up afterwards. Felicitas says I use Zotero. Also, Mrs. Shifotoka, hi. She uses OneDrive. Sarah uses also Zotero. Atlas TI can be useful. Yes, thanks, Sherman. Absolutely. Notes application on her Mac, notepads, Obsidian. I've heard nice things about Obsidian as well. Mendeley, I love all the strategies. So I'm not going to read every single one, but very nice. I like, yes, I really like whatever you do, as long as it's useful to you. And it does take some discipline to be meticulous about the record keeping. That's, say, for example, I also like to use Excel. That Excel doesn't end up looking like that. Or even if you use Mendeley, where it ends up looking, it just becomes an article dump, where you just dump article after article after article. So what I'd like to, I'm going to share. No, before I share that. So as long as the system works for you, and our system might change over time, I very, very briefly just want to share some, wait, I'm going to share my screen. Wait, let me try it a different way. There we go. It's going to look a bit weird initially. I got this, so this is just the Excel that I usually share with colleagues and students, where you put in your project title, purpose, or research question. I got this from a friend, and you share, you populate the different cells, the citation, what's the title, the methods, analyses, and this works quite nicely in the sciences, where, especially when you use research articles for your literature review. I adapted it slightly, so I still have the project title or the topic at the top, but I split the components of the reference into its different parts, because in the social sciences where I'm from, it's very useful to see what. And I made it all drop-down lists so that I can alphabetize, that I can see, oh, I've read 6 articles of this author, this is what their focus is, or I can organize it according to years, so that I can see how did the ideas progress, and then the journal or the book title, and what type of text it is. Especially if you're in a field where you use what is called grey literature, things like maybe memos, or you're using the minutes of meetings, or you're using internet sources. I'm not talking about journals that are available electronically, but if you use, say, a company's website or something like that, or blogs, the title field, this is especially useful if you're doing inter or transdisciplinary research. I kept the problem, aims, design, methods, but they're not always applicable. Results, conclusions, what are the implications of what they're saying, what is the argument, and then themes, because this helps me to, and we'll talk about organizing the literature review. This helps me to organize the structure of the literature review, what I'm going to put where, and what the main topics are. And then evaluation. What do I think about the article? And then if I'm going to include it, yes, no, maybe. And I never take anything out, even if I said, no, I'm not going to use it, because our ideas develop. So the way that we read, that also develops. And then something I thought I'm not going to use, I end up using that. I found there's an academic I follow on Twitter, now called X. I put the link in there. And what I really like about what Dr. Pacheco Vega does is in his Excel sheet, this I think is more applicable if you're in the arts, humanities, where a lot of the articles we read they don't follow the research article structure. They're more thematic. So he puts in what concept he uses. Can maybe just show you, no, you can click on the link and then you'll see how he does it. So the concept could be bottled water. And then the citation is obviously the citation. And then he has, what is the main idea? The main idea that would be similar to the themes that I have. Main idea could be about the environmental impact of bottled water. It could be about, the main idea could be a comparison between the safety of bottled water and the safety of tap water. Could be about the expenses, and then he just makes notes. And if this particular article or main idea refers to another article that he's also using, he'll put in the cross-reference, he'll add the quotes that he would like to use, if there are any, and the page number. So these are just some of the examples of how you can use an Excel sheet, ones that I found quite useful. Just sharing my PowerPoint again. And it's part of putting all your ideas into the Excel sheet, or in whichever form you find easiest to show your or to organize your ideas or to think through it. That's one way that you can do it. Sorry, I just got lost a little bit when the slides came up. It's a form of pre-writing. So it's that little bit in between reading and writing, where you're reading critically, but you're also starting to write. You're not necessarily making full sentences and composing paragraphs. And it's impossible to completely separate reading and writing from each other. One of my colleagues, I can't remember who she's quoting, but she always says that reading is like breathing in and writing is like breathing out. And they go together. You can't have one without the other. Another way, so including keeping notes, whether it's in Excel or whichever format you use, Mendeley, I'm going to look up some of the ones mentioned in the chat. You can also keep notes in this way. So this little picture here on the slide, it's a Rolodex. So that kind of shows my age. But what I like about the Rolodex, they're very difficult to find because we don't really use pen and paper anymore. What I like about the Rolodex is it has these little small index cards. And it's difficult sometimes if I'm making notes about something. I tend to start writing too much and I go off on tangents. And I start, composing. I'm not making notes. And you want something when you're doing this pre-writing to very quickly remind you of what you've read. And if the thing that you have, the summary that you've written, the notes that you've made is 2 pages long, that's not really helpful. So the index card helps me because it's limited space. I cannot write more than what's on that one little piece of paper. Even I tried with the Excel, I sometimes go overboard there as well. It's only one cell and I still write too much in the cell. So I very much limit myself when I use the Rolodex. So I'll write the reference at the top and then I'll just very, very briefly write, what does this text say? Very briefly, it's just a short note to remind yourself what the text says. Because those of us without an eidetic memory, which would be probably all of us, it's difficult to remember exactly what each article said that you read. You have a vague idea of who said what, but all the ideas are just stewing like a soup in your head, and it's all mixed together. So this helps you to just remember this is what X person said, this is what Y person said. Then I very briefly jot down, what does the text do? That helps me to distinguish between the different topics or articles, because you could have more than one article that say the same thing, and you can then make a comment like there is consensus in the research community about something, but the way in which they present the information could be different. So just jotting down very briefly, what does the text do, shows, it just reminds me, how does this article differ from the other article? And then sometimes you read an article and you think, this is really important, I really want to use this. And then when you read it again the next day, you can remember you wanted to use it, but you can't remember how. So what you can do is also, just very briefly on this little index card, is just jot down, what does the text mean? What makes it important to you? And then you have a shorthand of, okay, this is what the text is about. This is how it presents information. Very briefly, this is what it means. Also, what I like to do is I would just put a little color stripe from a highlighter at the top part of the little Rolodex, because I like to, when I thematize the different articles, I give each theme a different color, because then I can very quickly, when I have my Rolodex or I look at my Excel sheet, I can see the different colors. So I know all the yellow colors, they go together, all the blue colors go together. And sometimes an article might not fit in only one theme, so I'll make a little blue stripe and a little yellow stripe. And so when I write, then I take out the little index cards of the Rolodex, I put all the blue ones together, and then I start writing, and I have my little pack of my little pack of index cards next to me, and I go through them and add the information where it makes sense, create the links, the connections, and then by the time there's no index cards left, I know, okay, I've now added everything. I now know I didn't leave out any articles that I wanted to include. But you can play around with it. Not every strategy works for every single person. So you do what works for you. You can try this out, and you don't need to go and buy a Rolodex. You can just cut up little pieces of scrap paper and keep them together in a folder or something, or in a notebook. I like Charmaine's idea about the reading journal, where you can make notes about that as well. Now, once you start writing, past the pre-writing, you start integrating all the information. There's different ways in which you can do it. You can summarize a bunch of articles that you've read, or one article. You can paraphrase what they said, or you can quote. So very briefly, again, you can raise your hand if you want to say something, or in the chat again, you can put in, what are the differences between summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting? What would you say is the difference? Trokoye says quoting, you say exactly what the author has stated, and it can be in parentheses, absolutely. Momono Heng says summarizing, you condense, very nice information in your own words. And Devasham, I assume you're talking about paraphrasing, shows the way information is taken in and understood. Excellent, absolutely perfect. That's exactly the main differences. Luther, I love that. Yes, Luther says summarizing condenses the main ideas, paraphrasing rephrases the content, yes, and quoting, you use the exact same words. And then Gilbert says paraphrasing is saying information in different words. Excellent. Christopher, also quoting direct quotation from the text, paraphrasing, you're all 100% correct. So I'm just very, very quickly going to reiterate that is what, it's exactly what you said. With all of them, you reference the original source. Often, depending on the referencing style that you use, you might be required to add page numbers as well when you quote. Summarizing the text is usually shorter than the original. Paraphrasing you're putting it in your own words, and the text can be shorter or longer than the original. And with quoting, obviously, the text is exactly the same length. And with paraphrasing and summarizing, you use your own words. Quoting, you use the original exact words, and you also must have quotation marks to show. It's like the dinner party again. You're showing who is speaking with both the references and the quotation marks. And that's not where the analogy doesn't completely pull through when we talk about paraphrasing and summarizing, because then the other author's voices are filtered through your voice. You are paraphrasing. So it's like you're telling someone else what your friend at your dinner party said. Or you can think about it if you're the host of a talk show. Hosts of talk shows would often, if one of their guests say something, they will reflect back to them, and just to make sure that they understood what the other person said. And obviously that happens in real time, whereas real time for a literature review is much broader. It takes place over several years, where you're showing a conversation that took place over several years. Now, when this would be a summarize. In most cases, or sometimes in a literature review, you'll summarize. That's one. Oops, that is not what I wanted to do. You sometimes summarize in a literature review when there is consensus about something, if there's agreement, and you reference all of them and you summarize what all the authors have said. So, for example, recycling is a premier example of the collective co-production of a local government program, 5 references. And you won't then really show a lot of critical reading necessarily of it, because it's been established this is the consensus in the research community. And sometimes you can signal to your reader that you're summarizing by saying researchers agree that, or various studies have proven. So you just summarize a bunch of articles. This is where it also becomes very important what you put in and what you leave out. Because, say for argument's sake, you've read widely. So there are 20 sources, all saying the same thing. You'll have to be very selective about what to include and what to leave out, because you won't have to cite all 20 sources. That's going to make the in-text reference too clumsy, too long. And there's different things that you can decide, or help you to decide, which do I put in, which do I leave out. Depends on what you want to show your reader. Maybe you want to show your reader that this is a very relevant topic right now. So you only cite sources from the last 3 years, only the most recent ones. Or you might want to show your reader that this idea has been around for a while and it's still the same. So you cite the oldest sources and a few of the newest sources. Also remember, always cite the, I want to say, celebrities in your field, those who are considered authorities, so that you can show your reader, I am aware of the authorities in my field. So I am including them as well. Sometimes though, sometimes someone writes researchers agree that, and they have only one reference. The problem is, what that shows your reader is you read one source and you just accepted it as true. Unless, of course, someone else already did a literature review. So find a way in your sentence to signal to your reader that what you're citing isn't just one source and you now take it as everyone agrees with the source. You're citing a review. So then you can say, in Bradney's review of X, Y, and Z, they found that researchers agree that, or a review of the literature by Bradney and England proves that, and then you show what that, or tell your reader what that literature review proves, just to make sure your reader knows you read widely enough. They can trust your interpretation of everything that you've read. They can trust your stance and your ideas about the topic, because you've shown them that you've read a lot. Now, for the most part, when you when you review, when you write a literature review, for the most part, you're going to be reviewing. I'm jumping ahead. Before we get to reviewing, still talking about how you're integrating sources. I'd like you to, I think Francois is going to pop up, there we go, excellent. So on your screen, you're going to see a little poll that asks, which is better in academic writing, quoting or paraphrasing? And I'd like you to pick one. Which one do you think is better practice in academic writing? Is it better to quote? In other words, use the exact same words with, of course, the quotation marks and the reference, or is it better to paraphrase, to put things in your own words? So you can just click on your screen. I'm also going to click just to see if I can see the results. There we go. Oh, very nice. So if you made your choice, I see 92% of you are saying that it's better to paraphrase. Some of you said it's better to quote. I'd like to hear, I see there's already, you're preempting my question. I was going to ask, why do you say one or the other? And I see some questions about, so some of you said paraphrasing. Those who said paraphrasing, why would paraphrasing be better? And I'll get to the other questions just now. Those who said paraphrasing, you can raise your hand and Francois will give you a chance to speak. Or you can type. Yes. Mamona Heng says paraphrasing demonstrates understanding. Yeah, it's difficult. I see someone's hand. Yes, please, if someone could please unmute Anele. So they can speak.
Hello.
Hi, Anele. Yes. Why would you say yes? Which one did you choose?
I'm just thinking that paraphrasing afford the opportunity of a writer to synthesize the work of to enter into a discourse and put words to write on your own words, and also to so it's a greater opportunity because you will be thinking while you are writing and paraphrasing. So it's a nice thing because so that's what I wanted to say.
Very nice. And it tracks with what I see in the chat with a lot of people saying it shows your paraphrasing shows. Thank you so much for that, Anele. Paraphrasing shows your understanding. It shows your grasp of the information. It shows your interpretation. And I like what you said, what all of you said, tying back to the dinner party analogy, it shows your voice. It shows what you, how you interpret it, your interpretation. Those of you who say that quoting is better, why do you feel that quoting is better? There's no right or wrong, just by the way. I see some more arguments for paraphrasing. I like what you said, Tabisa, that quoting can sometimes appear untidy and the text becomes very busy. Yes. Argumentation. So I don't see anyone defending quoting here. Okay. So I'll keep an eye on the chat for in case anyone says here, add, there we go. Sarah says, quoting doesn't risk changing what the author said. Yeah, sometimes we might feel a little bit nervous about showing our interpretation of the source because we're scared we're going to interpret it wrong. And if we quote, it's their exact words. So we're capturing exactly what they said. And it doesn't then risk misrepresenting what the author said. Luther also said quoting is better when the exact wording of the original text is important for clarity. Very nice. Precision or emphasis, especially if the author is phrasing, if their phrasing is powerful, authoritative. Yes. Christopher said quoting is not necessarily better, but it can show application of understanding. Yes, where you show where you pull your knowledge from. I like that. Caitlin, I love that. It is field specific. In science, quoting is rare. And the danger that Devasha mentions is quoting can raise your plagiarism score. Yes. So I want to tie in with what I think Caitlin mentioned, that it can be field specific. It is very field specific. So I'm just going to go out of the chat again. In the sciences, you might have noticed in the articles that you've read, they don't quote a lot because they're not analyzing what someone said. They are analyzing, no, they're not analyzing how someone said something. They're analyzing just the content, just what someone said. How they phrased it doesn't matter. And it does, by paraphrasing, you are better able to show your understanding, show that you are knowledgeable, that you know what you're talking about. It doesn't mean that you'll never quote. So in some fields, in the humanities and the arts, some social sciences, we do quote a lot more often. But that is usually because we're not just analyzing what someone said. We're also analyzing, like Luther said, their turn of phrase, how they interpreted something. And then you quote to highlight that, just that phrase, to highlight the important wording. I can't remember now who said it. I think it's Tabisa, if I'm not correct, who said that it can look a little bit clumsy or a little bit messy. Because even if you quote, you still need to show your understanding. You still need to paraphrase and show how you interpret it. And quoting we usually use as evidence of something. You still have to tell your reader what that something is that you're providing evidence for. So in the social sciences, the arts, humanities, we'll often quote, or in law fields, we'll quote a law or an act because our interpretation of the law doesn't only depend on the content of that law. Our interpretation also depends on how that law is phrased. Or you might quote a definition of a concept or an idea because our interpretation of that definition depends on the content and on the phrasing. So you do what is conventional in your field, and even if in your field, if you are expected to quote, or it's, I want to say allowed to quote, as if it's something that we need permission for, but if you're allowed to quote, you want to still discuss it, and you still want to be selective about which parts do you quote, that you do it when you are trying to analyze the phrasing as well. But paraphrasing is difficult. Because in reviewing, we usually use paraphrasing. When reviewing, we show our critical thinking. You want, by paraphrasing, you're showing your interpretation. And that can be a little bit scary because, as one of you said, I think it was Caitlin, that you might be worried that you misrepresent what someone else has said. But your reader is reading your text because they want to see what you said. And as long as you can explain why you analyze it, why you understand it in this way, if you have a good reason, you have a good explanation, then you're probably not misrepresenting what they're saying. That's also why our drafting process, writing is a process. So you're going to go through multiple drafts where you rephrase and you rethink about what you've read and repackage it each time to show your interpretation. Also, when we're reviewing, we're not just interpreting, we're also synthesizing the ideas, not synthesizing the sources with each other. So you're showing the conversation in your dinner party. You're kind of giving your reader a sneak peek into what does your dinner party look like? What was the conversation going on? But remember, you're not silent. So you're not only synthesizing the sources with each other, you're also synthesizing the sources with your own topic. So you look at your keywords and you bring in your voice. How does this, what the conversation that's going on, how do I fit into that conversation? What is my take on this? And you can use signpost words that can be linking words like in addition, however, therefore, all of those words, but also signaling to your reader how you're using the sources. For example, if you say, Bradney's review of topic X shows that researchers agree on something. So that you're signaling to your reader, I'm referring to an already existing review. Or you're signaling to your reader that this theoretical paper claims this, however, in practice, when a case study was done, the theory didn't quite realize in practice. So you use those signalings to your reader, or signals, to show to your reader what it is that you're doing to the source and how everything gets together. I want to dwell a little bit on paraphrasing because what I gathered from our workshops is that it's challenging to paraphrase for various reasons. I'm going to open the chat again on my side, but I'd like you to read these two examples. So on the left, you have the original text, and on the right, you have how the writer rephrased the original text. And in the chat, I'd like you to tell me if you think it's good paraphrasing or not, and why you say it is or isn't. Magdalena says it can be shortened. Yeah. Francina says it is not good paraphrasing because I did not reference Joyko and DBAs. Yes. Oh, Joyko, so I have no idea how to pronounce these surnames. I'm sorry. And then Mpopoli picked it up. The writer used synonyms to paraphrase instead of writing it in their own words. So this might not be, or definitely will not be picked up by Turnitin, but it would still be considered plagiarism. But for me, it's even worse because it's not very good paraphrasing because we can't see the writer's own voice. We have no evidence that they read Cabe and Martin, let alone understood it. They literally substituted every word with a synonym. And usually, sometimes people say I'm too forgiving, but I find that often when writers do this, some of my colleagues would say the student was being lazy. I think it might be an issue of confidence. You know you're not supposed to plagiarize. You know you're supposed to put it in your own words. But I assume many of us, most of us in the room, we're probably not writing in our first language. So it doesn't matter that I have a master's degree in English. I still, every time I sit down to write, I feel like an English second language writer. It doesn't matter that I'm more comfortable in English. So yes, Ntapisa says language is a challenge. And even though you have the vocabulary, sometimes your brain just doesn't access the words that you wanted to. And this could be an easier way and might feel like a safe way to paraphrase is to literally substitute words synonym for synonym. The problem is it doesn't show understanding. It doesn't show your knowledge. It doesn't prove that you've read Cabe and Martin. So this would be how not to do it. Well, here's another example. I'm not going to make you read through it again, but this would be an example of good paraphrasing. It's shorter, but it doesn't necessarily have to be shorter. It can be the same length, it can be longer, but the writer here on the left-hand side, they took the original and they made it their own. They wrote about it in a way that shows their voice. All they needed was the reference and it would have been, well, close to perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect text. I should just add that. So never, ever try to write the perfect literature review because you'll never finish it. It only has to be good enough. And I'm going to give you a few practical tips of how you can practice paraphrasing, how you can become more confident in your own voice. And we're going to start small with nutshell writing. So nutshell writing is when you write tiny bits of text and you use that to flesh out something bigger. So you already have the taking notes, whether it's on a Rolodex, index cards, whether it's with an Excel sheet, whatever you use, that's part of the nutshell writing. I'm going to show you how to use sentence skeletons. What I like about sentence skeletons, it's an idea that comes from Thompson and Kamler. And what I like about the sentence skeletons are that if you think about how small children learn to speak, they learn their mother tongue by mimicking the sounds the adults make. So for those of us who are early career academics or postgrad, we might not have confidence in our own voice yet, but the way that we can then develop our academic language capability is by mimicking what more established academics have done. I'm not saying plagiarize. What you do is you pick a strong section from an article. You go to an article that you think is really well written, and you try to learn from it. What did this writer do in the way it is written that made this that made the writing good? So, and maybe I really struggle with writing conclusions. So I always struggle to find the words to show that I am now finishing something, so that it doesn't just end bluntly. So for example, what you could do is go and look at a conclusion if you know that's what you're struggling with, and then take out the content from the sentences. And what you're left with is the skeleton of the sentence. And you use that and you put your own content into the gaps that's now left. I'll quickly show you what I mean by that. Here's just some examples of sentence skeletons. For example, researchers found that recent studies show that although researchers claim that, blah, 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 our context shows that. One controversial issue is that these are phrases, the sentence skeletons are phrases that don't belong to a specific author. It's not specific to their topic. It's not a phrase specific to them that they coined, that they own. So it's not plagiarizing. You are just using the skeleton, and then you add your content. Researchers found that, and you add your content. Just very briefly shown. I'm hoping I'm going to do it successfully now. So, for example, this is a conclusion to an introduction from a thesis, and the sentence skeletons in this case would be, so for example, the first sentence reads, this study identified a significant problem within South African education policies, and you take out the content. So they're writing about South African education policies. That's not your topic. So what you're left with is this study identified a significant problem within, and that's your, oh, sorry, that's a very skew line, but you get the idea. That this is what you can use that and you can plop in your content. So this study identified a significant problem within different models for airflow dynamics, for argument's sake. Or if you don't want to say it's a significant problem, you can choose which part of the skeleton you use. This study identified X, Y, and Z. The second sentence, the skeleton is the main research question was, something you put in your research question. Other bits of the skeleton is, in other words, you can use there is a tension, or you can use there is a shortcoming. It very much depends on, not all bodies look the same. So whatever you're building, you put that, you use that as a skeleton. You don't have to use all the bones. You only use the relevant bones, the relevant skeletons. Some more tips for paraphrasing. If you have maybe multiple sources that you want to paraphrase, or maybe just one source, read once carefully through the text. And then I don't mean once forever and ever, and you're never going to look at the text again, but just before you write about it, just read it once, because if you read it like 3 times in a row and you immediately go and sit and you write about it, that author's voice is stuck in your head, and you're going to end up plagiarizing. You're going to end up using exactly the same words they do. So read it once, put it away. Don't look at it while you're writing about it. And you can use the same questions that I showed you for writing notes, but now you're writing as much as you possibly can. You try to explain what is this text saying. You can pretend you're writing it to, you're explaining the text to someone who hasn't read the article. They know nothing about your topic. You're explaining what the text says, how the text says it, and then why is this text important? And when you write this, when you paraphrase something the first time, don't worry about spelling and grammar. Don't worry about punctuation, style, language. Don't worry about any of that, because your purpose with this is to just get your voice on paper. You're preparing for your dinner party. You're preparing to be a good host. And then after you've written in as much detail as you can, answers to those 3 questions, I see a question about how the text says it. Then you go back to the original. I'll answer that just now. Then you go back and you see, is there anything that you left out? Anything so similar that you maybe then need quotation marks or need to, then you can use the synonyms for that couple of words or phrases. When I say how the text says it, this could be, if I'm thinking about more of the sciences and the social sciences, what type of method did they use? So was it the text is explaining, I'm trying to think of a topic, but I can't. So the text is explaining how a certain person's psychology works, and how the text says it is maybe it's a theoretical paper. It's theorizing about the psychopathy of a specific group of people. Or it could be a case study where someone with specific psychological traits were, it sounds horrible, examined, or, you know, it's a case study of this particular person. Or it can be more a quantitative study where surveys were done to identify what are the characteristics of sociopaths, and the text. So that's how you explain this text is a survey, or it theorizes about the psychopathy of a certain group of people. I hope that answers the question. I'm thinking more in the arts and humanities. It could be the text is presenting the information in both verbal and visual format. So if you're in the visual science, the visual arts, they're presenting the information with visual information as well. Or they present the information, they're doing a close reading of the text, or they're using a specific approach in their analysis. I hope that answers your question. Very quickly want to show you how to, sometimes you find a quote and you love the quote. It's a beautiful quote. And you know, well, I actually don't have a reason to quote it. So I'm just going to, but how do I put it better? It's so beautifully put. And I think sometimes we forget that writing is a process for the sources that we read as well, because what we are seeing is the final product. So we think it came out looking so good. But this person whose quote you love, they also went through the drafting and redrafting process to get it to sound that beautiful. So what you can do is, this might sound counterintuitive, you write out the quote. Because writing is considered a higher order form of thinking and learning. So the mere act of writing activates your critical thinking. So what I mean is, you don't copy and paste the quote. You physically type it out on your laptop or write it out if you're writing on a piece of paper. And the benefit, of course, is then your eyes stay on the same piece of paper where you're writing about the quote. So you then explain the quote and as much detail as you can. Again, pretend that you're explaining the quote to someone who has not read the quote. They haven't seen it, they haven't read the article, they don't know what your topic is. So you explain the quote for them. And then why something in the quote stood out for you. And this is what I like about this kind of free writing. You don't worry about spelling and grammar again, style, none of that. You polish that afterwards. You can literally write, I like this quote because, and you start explaining, because in your explanation of why you like this quote so much, you will dig up reasons that's going to be useful, relevant to your reader as well, to highlight to them what in this quote is important. And then you look at your own keywords and you tie what the quote said to your own work. And what's nice about this is now you can go and delete the quote because you have an explanation of the quote in your own words. You polish that, you put in the references where necessary. Because sometimes a writer would tell someone, this is what Smith said. And your reader's asking, but so what? Why are you telling me what Smith said? You now have this. You've explained why is this quote interesting or relevant or useful. So you have an explanation of what the quote means. You answer your reader's question about so what, and you linked it to your own topic. Now, paraphrasing takes practice, and the more you do it, the better you get at it, but it does take work. So you just have to keep practicing paraphrasing and remembering that writing is a process. So you keep at that process. Your writing keeps improving, your paraphrasing keeps improving. Just be very careful of paraphrasing tools. Not all of them are very good. So this is just a really funny example. I'll let you read it while I talk, where it was a colleague from the education faculty shared this. One of our undergrad students, they had to analyze a book called The Rest of Us Just Live Here. And it looks like this person took an article and they put it through a paraphrasing tool. And this is what the paraphrasing tool came up with. And it makes absolutely zero sense. I can see some laughter. Someone has finished reading it and it becomes completely ridiculous because some of the paraphrasing tools paraphrase synonym for synonym. They literally substitute every word with synonyms. And the problem is synonyms share some meaning, but each word has their own connotation, their own separate meaning. So you can't just willy-nilly. I see Dr. Christofina says I get that from her students, yes. It can go awfully wrong. And paraphrasing, it's a skill, but be very careful of using paraphrasing tools to help you paraphrase. I see someone's hand is up.
Hi, I'm interested because one of the biggest challenges that I have, I'm at the proposal stage for my PhD, and I think this has been a session which is interesting, especially on the paraphrasing part, because that's where I was a little bit battling, because I've done a lot of just quoting, and I think this session has just helped me to sort of zoom in terms of just using the paraphrasing, a mindset or tool to really sort of, share my own ideas in terms of what I've read in terms of the text. That's what I wanted to share.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And I see Bright. Hi, Bright.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Bright. How are you?
I am good. Just a little bit confused and not sure if I'm confused or if I'm doing something right. So I'm doing my studies. I'm in the UK with the University of Leicester, working on my foundational chapters. So there's this thing which I've noted around in-text writing, where, for example, you provide what the other scholar that you are citing indicated, then you put the name and the page number in the bracket. And I think in some instances, I think some people take them as direct. It's not necessarily in direct quote, but rather it's just a statement which is taken as it is, and someone just puts the year and the page number, like 2003 ... 93, then you close. Is that plagiarism if you do it like that?
It's not supposed to be. I can maybe just briefly, so the person is paraphrasing, but they put in the reference and they put in the page number as well. Whether you include page numbers, even when you're paraphrasing, will depend on the referencing style that your specific department wants you to use, or if you're publishing an article, whether that article, that journal has a house style. But it wouldn't be considered plagiarism, or it's not supposed to be, because you're still paraphrasing, you're putting it in your own words, and you put in the reference. Now, it might be picked up as plagiarism if you use the exact same words and you didn't put quotation marks and you don't have a reference, but it's exactly the same phrasing that someone else has used. So that might, yeah, it shouldn't be plagiarism. I hope that answers.
Yes, that answers me. And I think the final question, which probably you get into, is, are we going to get a recording of this? Because I think when you're studying, you need to inform yourself, like we are scholars, so we like referring things back to our notes. So I don't know if we're going to get a recording for this one.
In the chat, they're going to share the recording. So they said in the chat that they will, but I know not everyone has access to the chat, but I know my colleagues, they will share the recording. I like here what some of the colleagues have said. Paraphrasing does not mean that you do not cite. Yes, you still cite. So if you have this quote that you paraphrased, I said you can delete the quote, but you still have the explanation of the quote and you put in the references because you've now paraphrased. Yes. I see another hand. Could we give access to just this one more person before we continue? Dr. Wiepener, if we can, oh yes, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Yes, this is most helpful. I just want to ask on a practical level, I never see authors referring to themselves as I or even as we in articles. Do you know if it doesn't have the authors, if you don't have authors' names in brackets, do you assume the rest of the text is their voice? I liked what you said about your voice coming through. I'm just not so sure how to do it, your own voice.
Yeah, usually if you reference, you're indicating to your reader this is someone else's voice. And then your reader assumes, if there is no reference, that this is all you. And there's ways that you can signal to your reader. One is to obviously not have a reference, but you could then say, Wiepener claims X, Y, and Z. The implications of this are, and then you see, okay, this is now me speaking. It also depends on your field, because in the sciences, they're still a little bit nervous about using first-person pronouns to signal I am now saying something. So I think, I found, they don't really use it. You can use the third person and say the researcher found, or the researcher interprets this to mean. The danger is that it creates ambiguity and your reader isn't sure, are you talking about yourself or are you talking about the source that you've just read? So as long as that's clear. And then in the social sciences, it depends on your topic. But it's more common practice to use the first person, but it very much depends on your topic, whether it would be considered appropriate or not. And of course, on the conventions of not just your department, but also maybe of the journal, or conventions of from the conventions for maybe that your supervisor wants you to adhere to. So there are lovely, just moving on to the from the paraphrasing tools, there are some, the generative AI that we have today is absolutely wonderful, but you don't want to substitute your voice with the AI's voice. You still want to show your voice. So you still want to, you can use it as a tool, but it can't substitute your understanding and your interpretation of the sources. Okay. So I see Deversham asked, can the use of sentence skeletons be picked up in Turnitin? So Turnitin is an interesting thing because they're sneaky. They are they can pick up, or they, as if it's a human being, Turnitin, it can only pick up similarity. It cannot actually pick up plagiarism. And they're sneaky because they put it on like the 5th page of their website where they say it's not a plagiarism detection tool. It's a similarity index. But yes, it might be able to pick up sentence skeletons. And so you want to be cautious with that as well. The sentence skeletons are a nice way to get started with practicing and putting your own voice on paper. But then you go and you polish what you've written. The problem is that Turnitin can't pick up plagiarism. So a human being has to look at the report that's written, because sometimes the way Turnitin is set up, the person who set it up didn't necessarily tick all the necessary boxes. So they might not have ticked that Turnitin has to ignore everything that's in brackets, which means every single in-text reference it's going to pick up as plagiarized, because that's how you reference. Or it's going to pick up your reference list. Maybe they didn't tick the box that says exclude reference list, but that's not plagiarized. You're expected to reference in a particular way. And there is a parameter that the person who sets up Turnitin can put in place where it says ignore 4 or 5 words in succession, because sometimes you work in a field where a concept consists out of a whole phrase, and that is the terminology for that concept. You can't change it. You can't use synonyms for that, and Turnitin is going to pick it up as plagiarism. Same with the sentence skeletons. It doesn't belong to someone specific. But if you have, I just want to jump to the previous slide. You have researchers have found that those are 4 words in succession, and it might be flagged by Turnitin, but a human has to read Turnitin. Read the report generated by Turnitin. I'm just quickly checking anything else, Luther, that you want to flag in the chat. Oh, I see no point with here.
Okay, so we have someone who asked, do you use the first person when giving your views?
You can. You want to write in such a way, the reason I sound tentative about that is you want to emphasize the content, not yourself. And one of the ways in which we emphasize content is by what we place first in our sentence. So if you start a sentence with, I found that, you're emphasizing yourself instead of emphasizing what you found. But it's not inappropriate so necessarily, so you don't want to do it too much. But so in the humanities, our approach is that there's no such thing as pure neutrality, doesn't exist, and pretending that there is by the language that you use, like third person or passive voice, that is actually a little bit disingenuous. It's not authentic, it's not really honest. And that in the humanities, we embrace, some fields in the humanities, we embrace that there is an I doing the research. There is the way who you are influences your frame of reference, influences the way that you introduce your topic, the way in which you analyze the literature. So people are, we are encouraged to use the first person, but in other fields, it's not the convention. So do what is the convention of your field. And if you are allowed to use the first person, use it appropriately to show this is my frame of reference. I do see 2 more questions that I would love to answer. Makoena asked, due to language use limitation, can I paraphrase and then put it on an AI tool to polish the info? I want, maybe. So you can, as long as you don't use it to substitute your voice, part of, even though you might not feel very comfortable in your writing language, you can still, by paraphrasing, you're practicing and you're becoming more equipped at writing in academic language. So I want to say, yes, you can paraphrase it and then put it in AI tool to polish it, but it's very important to think about what you mean by polishing. If you ask it to look at the grammar, that should be fine. If you ask it to rephrase it, or you ask it to write it in a certain style, that's not completely your own voice anymore. And it can cause problems where it's picked up by Turnitin because it has a plug-in that can help the tool to help Turnitin to pick up the when text is AI generated. So be careful of that. One problem I came across with someone I attended a workshop with, or it wasn't a workshop, I can't remember. She would use text-to-speech tools. So she would speak and the tool would write down what she speaks and then she'll polish it. And then Turnitin will still pick it up as plagiarism or that it was written by AI, because an AI put her speech into text. It's still her words. So just be careful of the way that you use it. Be very cautious, but it is a nice tool to use to help us develop our own voices. Just quickly before we get to see the hand, Christabel asked what words can be used to add my voice. It's very subtle. So it can be in what you choose to emphasize in a sentence. So do you emphasize the authors, where you say Smith found that? Do you emphasize yourself by I found this? Do you put the content first? It can be in the verbs that you use. So if you say that Smith believes that, the moment we use the word believe in academic writing, it's kind of a bit like throwing shade on them, like this is what they believe. It's not really valid. And then you say Chipembere argues that, and you go, okay, I know it shows that the writer believes what Chipembere says, but not what Smith said. And if we can get, yes, Luther.
Okay, yeah, I just had another question that I picked up, and just to notify you, because we're getting people putting in a lot of questions,
yes.
So I'm finding this very interesting. We're gonna extend the time a little bit, if that's okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yes,
so that
thank you.
time won't be an issue then. So if people have questions, they should just type them out in the Q&A and the chat. But we have this question. Earlier on, you spoke about celebrities in a field. So there's a participant who's asking, is there a way to ensure you have all the celebrities in your field? My topic is quite interdisciplinary. That is sociology, history, and education. And I have supervisors in one field. This has resulted in me not having all the celebrities across all the topics.
Okay. That is challenging. Usually we would rely on our supervisors to make sure we have all the celebrities, but within an interdisciplinary field that can be challenging. My only solution for that would be read a lot in all the disciplines. It's a lot of work, but and then you're going to read many more texts than what you put in your final product, your final thesis or literature review. And that's perfectly normal, because it actually helps you to think through the different ideas and the different approaches. But yeah, it does take some time. So, and when you read all these sources, pay attention to who they are citing, and you'll notice that the same sources keep popping up. And that is a good indicator that that might be a celebrity in your field. They're considered an authority. Even if you disagree with what they say, it's still good to cite the authority to show that I am aware of this authority, even if I disagree. Another way that you can do it is find critical friends in those fields, and you can share your writing with each other and give each other feedback, which is difficult because, I mean, sociology and history and education on their own are such large fields that even if you find someone from sociology, they might be in a completely different subdiscipline. So share your writing with people in similar subdisciplines. I hope that helps, Ms. Gajar. That helps. I also saw that there was a hand up. I think it was.
Quickly, what I do is I paraphrase actually, and then I go into the AI model, and then I utilize that, and then I go back and read it again. And then what I would do is I would then support it with an example, actually. In that particular field or in that particular area, and then I go through it again and see if it makes sense, and then I continue to the next paragraph or so in that particular case. I just wanted to mention that in particular. That's the way I do it. Is that right, or is there another way?
I like what you say about that, because it sounds like after you get feedback from the chatbot, you still polish it a bit more by adding examples. You don't just take it as is. You still work with it like a piece of clay. You still work with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, very. And I'm also from Namibia, so
okay.
Lovely to meet you, Gerald.
Well, thanks a million and much appreciated.
Thank you. I also saw some other comments here. Kogi, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. I do apologize if I mispronounce your name. Said, I'm also in the interdisciplinary field, and I self-reflect on whether I have an unconscious bias towards certain celebrities. I'm glad you reflect on that. That is very important. I also have, sometimes you might have met some of these celebrities, or you might have heard stuff about them and they don't seem like very nice people, and then you don't really feel like using their work. That can be a challenge, but it's good that you reflect on it and then try to work away that bias. Look at the work and see if it's useful. There's an argument to be made for ignoring some of those sources who are considered authorities because they all come from the global north. There's an excessive emphasis on theorists and academics from the global north, and you might want to, you can in a footnote or somewhere said that you explicitly you're not going to cite sources from the global north. You are citing authorities from, you can even make it very specific, not just the global south, but specifically from South Africa. Not South, that is very limiting. Sorry, I meant Africa, from Africa, to strategically emphasize the value that African scholars bring to your topic, and because they're writing from a similar context that we are. So you can strategically and deliberately do that. Ignore the global north authorities and emphasize the authorities from our continent. I just quickly want to see if there's... Okay, someone asked, Ms. Gibson, if you're going through studies on your topic and you find the majority of them are taking a particular viewpoint, how do you then maintain the balance of arguing both sides? Being careful of bias, if there's little information on the opposing viewpoint. If there's no opposing viewpoints, one reason could be that it really just works that way. So you can then summarize and say, this is what everyone says, this is what it is. But if there is a little bit of opposing view, you can bring them in, but you still scrutinize them. I'm just going to jump back to that slide. In the same way that you did the other sources, you still scrutinize them to see, is their argument valid? Is there internal consistency, presuppositions? What are the implications? Because even if you find an opposing viewpoint, it might not be a very strong opposition. It might be that it's a fairly weak counter-argument. You can then either say there is opposing views, but it's not as sound and you explain why it's not valid, or you can just leave it out and say, well, it's just so bad that you're not going to use it. I just quickly want to check if there's more Q&A. Luther, or did I miss anything important?
You've pretty much covered, most of them,
Okay.
if not all of them.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. I do very, very quickly, since Natalie already said we can have a bit more. Oh, no, not Natalie. Luther said we can have a little bit more time. I'm going to cram in a little bit more. Just about the structure, because when you have a dinner party, you do a lot of planning and you have like a frame or a kind of framework in place of who am I inviting, who am I going to put where, what am I serving, and that usually I equate that to like the structuring your literature review. So there's different types of literature reviews. I'm just going to mention 3 of them because I'm going to focus on the right-hand side. So the different fields might call their literature reviews by different names, and there are subtle differences between them. So the main types of literature reviews are narrative literature reviews, which is what I assume most of us were thinking about in this session. Get scoping reviews and systematic reviews. Other names I've kind of come across is umbrella review, meta-analyses. And there's an article I put the last slide has the references on it where you can read about the different types of literature reviews, but these are the main types. And a traditional narrative review, they're often challenging to structure. Same with the scoping review as well. I'm just looking for with the structure of a narrative or scoping review is usually according to themes. You'll never organize them according to author, because then they're going to, I'm just jumping between the slides. If you organize the literature according to author, it's going to read like a summary, and you don't want that. You don't want to have person A said this, person B said this, person C said that, and then we all go home and we're done. These are better ways to organize the literature, a narrative review or a scoping review. You can organize it chronologically, where you discuss the information as it was published over time, and you might do that to show how an idea or concept has developed, or according to the different theories or models that you use or definitions. Or you can organize it, most narrative and scoping reviews organize according to the themes that you saw with Dr. Pacheco Vega's literature matrix and the one that I use. Or you can organize it according to your different hypotheses. You explain what in the literature led you to think of this hypothesis and what opposing views, if there are any, are there, or according to different case studies, or you can organize it according to methods. A systematic review is where you use very specific methodologies to conduct and write the systematic review. It's not that it's more, it can be considered more rigorous than a narrative or scoping review, but with a narrative and scoping review, you rely on the researchers, on their ability to conduct a review. You rely on the fact that you believe that they looked at all the relevant sources, they're covering everything, that they're not being biased. Whereas with a systematic review, all of that is they do everything they can to make it as objective as possible and eliminate any kinds of biases. And there's usually a panel like you have for your research proposal protocol that determines how is this systematic review going to be conducted, what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria. A narrative and scoping review, for example, wouldn't include a method of how you conducted the review, whereas with the systematic review, it's structured like a research article. We have introduction, methods, results, discussion, and you actually stipulate what are the procedures that you followed to conduct this systematic review. And the big difference between a systematic review and narrative or scoping reviews is if someone else does exactly the same as you did for the systematic review, they should find exactly the same articles, applying the inclusion and exclusion criteria. They should end up with exactly the same amount of articles and have exactly the same conclusions as you would, so it can be replicated. Whereas a narrative and a scoping review is more qualitative in nature in our approach to it. Whereas systematic review can look at literature where they use quantitative, qualitative methods, but it's a more quantitative way of doing, if that makes sense. But you can still look at themes. So I'm a bit nervous about using quantitative just for systematic. Are there any other questions? I hope I didn't go too fast now with this little bit. Oh, love this. An anonymous user asked, interestingly, am I allowed to quote my name from my unpublished thesis? Absolutely. You can cite yourself, but you will treat your own work as if it's someone else. So you cite and refer to yourself to your other work as if it's written by someone else, but you can cite yourself as long as your entire document isn't just self-citations, that there's a balance with the other voices as well, not having a dinner party with just yourself. And then Solomon asked a suggestion for good paraphrasing tools. I don't know about good paraphrasing tools. I would say clear of paraphrasing tools and just practice paraphrasing for yourself. I hope, yeah. But you can use certain Gen AIs as a tool, but not as a source, not to substitute your own views. Oh, someone asked, can one structure the literature review according to research objectives? Absolutely. You can organize it according to that as well. That's actually not on this list, but that's a very valid way of structuring it as well. Then I do want to say big thank you for everyone's engagement and for your comments and questions. Really enjoyed the session with you. Thank you for that. And I do have a list of references of interesting sources. I've included Dr. Raul Pacheco Vega's Twitter handle or X handle. I'm not sure what to call it anymore. And a link to his blog as well. He's very open to sharing resources, and then other books that I also found quite useful. Some of them have only a chapter on writing a literature review, but that chapter is particularly useful, and some of them focus just on reviews. And I do hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. I think, yeah.
Thanks so much, Selena. It's a massive, big thank you from the African Doctoral Academy side, and also thank you to also the colleagues that helped today, Francois as well as Luther, and also all of the delegates that joined. We do hope that you found value in the session. We did go over time slightly, but thanks again to Selena for being willing to go over time to make sure that everybody's questions were answered. We really appreciate it. And yeah, so if any, please look out again on our website. The link will be made available. Also, we will email everybody that's in the session with the link once the video is ready. And please look out for our newsletter for any upcoming events, as well as the summer school and the next webinar. So thank you very much, Selena. We appreciate it, and you must have a super afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.